The rain came down in steady sheets, drumming against the diner's windows and pooling in the cracks of the cobblestone street outside. Ricardo pushed open the heavy door, shaking rain from his battered denim jacket before slinging it over the back of a booth near the corner. His boots left faint wet prints on the tiled floor, but he didn't care. It had been a grueling day at the garage, and exhaustion clung to him like the dampness in the air. Savannah's famous oaks, draped with Spanish moss, swayed gently in the storm's embrace, their shadows flickering under the glow of old-fashioned street lamps. Inside the diner, it was warm and cozy, the hum of conversation and clinking cutlery a soothing contrast to the chaos outside. The scent of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the aroma of sizzling bacon and fried eggs, creating a sanctuary for the few late-night customers seeking refuge from the storm. This diner was his haven, a place where he could unwind without the need for small talk or pretense. With calloused hands, he picked up the laminated menu out of habit, even though he already knew what he would order: coffee, black, and whatever the daily special was. Tonight, he needed something warm to cut through the chill. Across the room, Emma sat at a booth by the window, her chin resting lightly on one hand as she stared out into the rain. Her usually polished exterior was stripped away tonight, replaced with the casual simplicity of a grey hoodie and jeans. She had slipped away from a corporate event, the kind where every handshake felt like a negotiation and every smile was more strategy than sincerity. The thought of another dry speech or clinking champagne glasses had been unbearable. So she'd ended up here, drawn by the comforting anonymity of the diner and its unassuming charm. A bowl of tomato soup sat half-finished in front of her, its warmth long forgotten as her thoughts wandered. She reached into her coat pocket for her wallet, ready to settle the check and head home. But her hand came up empty. A frown creased her brow as she patted her other pockets, searching again, this time more frantically. Panic bubbled up as realization dawned. Her wallet wasn't with her. The waiter approached with a polite but impatient expression, holding a notepad in one hand and a coffee pot in the other. "Everything all right, ma'am?" he asked, his tone courteous but clipped. Emma flushed, suddenly aware of the curious glances from nearby tables. I must have left my wallet at home," she stammered, forcing a nervous smile. "I can come back tomorrow and pay." "I promise," the waiter's eyebrows knitted together. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Policy says payment is due before leaving. No exceptions." Before Emma could stammer another apology, a voice cut through the tension. "I've got it." Emma turned her head sharply toward the sound, her eyes landing on Ricardo, who had stood up and was already fishing a crumpled bill out of his wallet. His expression was calm, even reassuring, as if this were the most natural thing in the world. "Really, it's no big deal," Ricardo said, handing the cash to the waiter. "Just add it to my check." Emma stared at him, momentarily speechless. Her cheeks flushed with embarrassment as she fumbled for words. "You didn't have to do that," she said softly, her voice tinged with both gratitude and discomfort. "I can pay you back as soon as—" Ricardo waved a hand, cutting her off gently. "It's just a bowl of soup," he said, his tone easy and unassuming. "Everyone has those days." The waiter, clearly relieved to have the situation resolved, quickly left to process the payment. Emma, however, remained rooted in her seat, her gaze fixed on Ricardo. There was something about his demeanor, uncomplicated and genuine, that caught her off guard. People didn't usually help her without expecting something in return. Yet here was this stranger, shrugging off his kindness like it was nothing. She reached for a napkin, her fingers trembling slightly, and scribbled something down before sliding it across the table toward him. "Thank you," she said, standing up. "Really?" Ricardo glanced at the napkin once she'd turned away. Written in neat cursive were the words, "I owe you. Please let me make this right. Beneath it was a phone number signed simply, Emma. The bell above the diner's door jingled as Emma stepped out into the rain. Ricardo watched her go, her figure swallowed by the downpour. A faint smile tugged at the corner of his mouth as he folded the napkin and tucked it into his jacket pocket. He hadn't done it for recognition or to impress anyone. Paying for her meal had been instinctive, a quiet gesture that reminded him of something his mother used to say, "Kindness doesn't need an audience." He leaned back in his seat, the tired ache in his shoulders momentarily forgotten as he took a sip of his coffee. Across the room, Marianne, the diner's ever-watchful waitress, approached his table with a knowing grin. "Smooth move, Ricardo," she teased, refilling his mug. "She was a looker. You should call her." Ricardo chuckled, shaking his head. "It's not like that, Marianne. She was in a tough spot." Sure, Marianne replied, winking as she walked away. Despite himself, Ricardo found his thoughts drifting back to Emma. There had been a flicker of something in her eyes, a vulnerability she seemed to be hiding beneath her calm exterior. He wasn't one to pry into strangers' lives, but he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to her story. As the rain continued to drum against the windows, Ricardo finished his coffee and signaled for the check. The diner, his sanctuary from the chaos of daily life, had offered more than just a hot meal tonight. It had left him with a lingering curiosity and a folded napkin in his pocket. Outside, the storm was beginning to subside, the downpour softening into a gentle drizzle. Ricardo pulled his jacket tightly around him as he stepped out into the cool night air. The streets glistened with reflections of streetlights, and the faint scent of wet earth filled his senses. He glanced toward the direction Emma had gone, though she was long out of sight. For now, he would leave it at that, a moment of kindness, a fleeting connection. But as he walked toward his truck, he couldn't help but wonder, would he see her again? The diner was quieter tonight, the hum of conversation subdued, as if the storm from the previous night had left the patrons weary. Ricardo sat at his usual corner booth, his hands wrapped around a steaming mug of coffee. His denim jacket was slung neatly over the back of the seat, the faint scent of motor oil clinging to the fabric, a reminder of another long day at the garage. Though he'd come here to unwind, his thoughts kept drifting to the folded napkin tucked into his jacket pocket. It had been over 24 hours since the chance encounter with Emma, and her note still lingered in his mind. He didn't typically dwell on strangers, but something about her had struck a chord. Maybe it was the way she'd looked out the rain-streaked window, lost in thought, or the flash of vulnerability in her eyes when she realized her wallet was missing. Either way, he couldn't shake the memory of her hurried thank you or the nervous smile she'd offered as she left. Marianne approached with her usual cheerful demeanor, a fresh pot of coffee in hand. "Still thinking about her, huh?" she asked, pouring a refill before Ricardo could reply. He shot her a bemused look. "You don't even know what I'm thinking." "Oh, please," Marianne said, leaning one hip against the booth. "I've worked here long enough to know when something, or someone, has gotten under your skin. You gonna call her, or what?" Ricardo hesitated, his fingers tightening around the mug. "It's not that simple," he said finally. "She doesn't owe me anything." Marianne smirked. "Maybe she doesn't, but maybe she left that number because she wanted to see you again. Ever think of that?" Before Ricardo could respond, the bell above the door jingled, signaling a new arrival. He glanced up instinctively, and his breath caught. There she was, Emma, shaking the rain from her hair as she stepped inside. She was dressed differently tonight, a soft blue sweater replacing the hoodie from before, but the same thoughtful expression lingered on her face. Their eyes met briefly, and Emma offered a hesitant smile before making her way to a booth near the window. She looked around, her gaze sweeping the room until it settled back on him. Gathering his courage, Ricardo stood, his boots scuffing lightly against the tiled floor, and made his way over. "Didn't expect to see you again," he said, his voice low but warm. Emma smiled, a little more confidently this time. "I owed you one," she replied, gesturing for him to sit. "And besides, the soup here was pretty good." Ricardo chuckled as he slid into the seat across from her. "Glad to hear it. I wasn't sure you'd come back." Emma's smile softened. "I'm not really one to leave debts unpaid." Ricardo tilted his head, studying her for a moment. "You don't owe me anything, you know. It wasn't about that." Emma looked down at her hands, tracing the edge of the laminated menu absent-mindedly. "Maybe not," she admitted, her voice quieter now. "But it still meant something to me. Not many people would have done what you did." He shrugged, a modest smile tugging at his lips. "It was just a bowl of soup." Emma shook her head slightly, meeting his gaze. "It wasn't just the soup. It's been a long time since someone did something for me without expecting anything in return. I guess I just wanted to say thank you, properly this time." Her sincerity caught Ricardo off guard, and he found himself unsure how to respond. To deflect, he leaned back in the booth and gestured to the menu. "Well, if you're here, might as well try the daily special. It's pretty good tonight." Emma laughed softly, the sound light and genuine. "You sound like a regular." "You could say that," Ricardo said with a grin. "This place is kind of my second home." Emma studied him for a moment, her curiosity piqued. "Second home? What's the first?" Ricardo hesitated, but there was something disarming about the way she asked, like she genuinely wanted to know. "The garage," he said finally. "It's where I work, fixing cars, tuning engines, stuff like that. Not exactly glamorous, but it's honest." Emma leaned forward slightly, her interest apparent. "Do you like it?" Ricardo nodded, his smile growing more thoughtful. "Yeah, I do. It's not always easy, but there's something satisfying about it. Fixing things, making them work again. I've always been good with my hands and, well, it keeps me grounded." Emma listened intently, her chin resting on one hand. "That sounds fulfilling. I envy that." Her words surprised him. "Envy? Why would you envy fixing busted-up cars?" Emma hesitated, as if weighing how much to reveal. "Because it's simple," she said finally. "It's real. You know, there's a start and a finish, and you can see the results of your work. My life, it's not like that. It's complicated." Ricardo sensed the weight behind her words, but chose not to press. Instead, he offered a small nod of understanding. "Complicated doesn't mean it's not worth it," he said. "Maybe you just need a break from it sometimes." Emma smiled faintly, as if his words had struck a chord. "Maybe you're right." Marianne approached their table with a knowing grin, placing 2 mugs of steaming coffee in front of them. "Looks like our soup fan found her way back," she teased lightly, giving Ricardo a playful nudge before walking away. Emma laughed softly, shaking her head. "She's observant." "She's nosy," Ricardo corrected with a chuckle, though there was clear affection in his tone. "But she means well." They fell into easy conversation, trading stories about their favorite spots in Savannah and memories of simpler times. Ricardo found himself drawn to the quiet warmth in Emma's smile, while Emma couldn't help but admire the grounded sincerity in his voice. As the evening wore on, the rain outside began to taper off, leaving the streets glistening under the dim glow of streetlights. Emma glanced at her phone and realized how much time had passed. She sighed softly, reluctant to leave but knowing she had to. "I should probably get going," she said, her tone tinged with regret. "But thank you again, for the soup and the company." Ricardo nodded, his expression thoughtful. "You know, you can come back any time. The coffee's not bad either." Emma smiled, her eyes meeting his. "I just might take you up on that." As she stood and made her way to the door, Ricardo watched her go, the faintest hint of a smile still on his face. He didn't know much about her yet, but he couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of something worth exploring. The morning sun filtered through the blinds of Ricardo's small apartment, casting faint stripes of light onto the floor. He sat at the worn kitchen table, a half-empty mug of coffee in front of him. The morning silence was broken only by the occasional creak of the floorboards or the faint hum of the refrigerator. Normally, he appreciated this quiet time before heading to the garage, but today his thoughts were elsewhere. He found himself thinking about Emma, her easy smile, the quiet elegance in the way she spoke. There was a complexity to her, something she wasn't saying, and it intrigued him more than he cared to admit. The napkin she'd left the first night was still folded in his jacket pocket, and the memory of their conversation the evening before lingered. Ricardo shook his head, brushing the thought aside as he grabbed his keys and jacket. Work wouldn't wait, and there were cars that needed fixing. As he stepped outside, the crisp morning air greeted him, carrying the scent of wet pavement from the previous night's rain. His truck started with a familiar rumble, and he made his way to the garage, letting the steady rhythm of the engine ground him. The garage was already bustling when he arrived. Roy was under the hood of an old pickup, humming off-key to a country song playing from the shop radio. The smell of oil and grease filled the air, along with the metallic clang of tools against machinery. "You're late," Roy said without looking up, a grin evident in his voice. "Morning to you too," Ricardo replied, setting his coffee mug down on the workbench. "What's on the list today?" Roy wiped his hands on a rag and gestured toward a clipboard. "Couple of regulars, nothing too crazy, and one mystery customer. Some lady with a busted radiator called in last night. Said she'd bring her car in today." "Sounds straightforward enough," Ricardo said, though his mind wandered briefly to the possibility of seeing Emma again. He shook off the thought, reminding himself not to get ahead of things. As the day wore on, Ricardo fell into the familiar rhythm of work. His hands moved with practiced ease, tightening bolts, checking fluids, and diagnosing problems. It was honest work, the kind that didn't leave room for pretense or overthinking. Yet, in the rare, quiet moments between tasks, he found his thoughts drifting back to the diner and Emma's quiet admission. "It's been a long time since someone did something for me without expecting anything in return." Across town, Emma sat in her office at Bennett Enterprises, the morning sun glinting off the expansive glass windows that overlooked Savannah's historic district. The view was beautiful, but today it felt like a gilded cage. Her desk was immaculate as always, save for the neatly stacked reports and the buzzing phone she was deliberately ignoring. The echoes of last night's conversation with Ricardo lingered in her mind. His world seemed so far removed from hers, yet it felt refreshingly real. He spoke about his work with a simplicity and pride she hadn't encountered in years, fixing cars, building trust with customers, finding fulfillment in the tangible results of his labor. It was a stark contrast to the constant strategizing and maneuvering that defined her days. Emma's reverie was interrupted by a sharp knock on the door. Before she could respond, it swung open, revealing Gordon Lake, her company's chief operating officer and a persistent thorn in her side. Dressed impeccably in a tailored suit, he carried the air of someone who thought himself indispensable. "Emma," he began, his tone clipped and businesslike, "we need to finalize the details for the Charleston acquisition. The board expects a proposal by Friday." Emma sighed inwardly, setting down her pen. "I'm aware, Gordon. I've been reviewing the reports." "Well, it would be helpful if you joined the calls instead of delegating everything," he said, his words laced with thinly veiled condescension. "The board has noticed your absence lately." Emma narrowed her eyes, her professional demeanor firmly in place. I've been managing other priorities, Gordon, and as far as I'm aware, the board entrusted me with the authority to make those decisions. Gordon's smirk faltered, but only slightly. Of course, but I'd hate to see concerns arise about focus or leadership. His implication hung in the air, sharp and deliberate. Emma forced a calm smile, even as irritation simmered beneath the surface. I appreciate your concern, but I'll handle it. Gordon left, clearly unsatisfied, but Emma didn't care. She leaned back in her chair, exhaling slowly. This was the part of her job she despised. The constant power plays, the need to prove herself at every turn despite years of success. For once, she wished she could trade it all for something simpler. Her thoughts drifted back to Ricardo. He didn't know who she was, what she did, or the weight she carried, and she wasn't ready to tell him. Not yet. For now, she wanted to hold on to the version of herself she felt in his presence, someone unencumbered by titles, expectations, or wealth. As the clock struck noon, Emma grabbed her bag and stepped out of her office. She needed air, space to think. Perhaps a visit to the diner, a familiar place of quiet comfort, would help clear her mind. Back at the garage, Ricardo had just finished patching up the radiator on a minivan when the bell above the front door chimed. He looked up, expecting the next customer. Instead, his heart gave a small, unexpected jolt. There she was. Emma, again. Their eyes met, and she smiled, a quiet but unmistakable expression of relief and recognition. "Looks like I found my way back," she said lightly, stepping inside. Ricardo's lips quirked into a faint smile as he grabbed a rag to wipe his hands. "You must really like the coffee," he said, his tone teasing but warm. Emma shrugged, her gaze sweeping the room. "Maybe I just like good company." Ricardo chuckled, motioning toward the bench near his workstation. "Well, I've got a few minutes before my next job. Have a seat." As Emma settled onto the bench, the garage buzzed around them, a stark contrast to the quiet confines of her office. Yet, for the first time in a long time, Emma felt at ease. And as Ricardo began telling her about the challenges of the day, she realized she wasn't just intrigued by his world. She wanted to be part of it. The late afternoon sun bathed Savannah in a warm, golden glow, casting long shadows across the cobblestone streets. Ricardo leaned against his truck, waiting outside the small coffee shop where he and Emma had agreed to meet. His hands were tucked into the pockets of his worn jeans, and though he appeared relaxed, his mind buzzed with anticipation. He wasn't sure what had prompted him to suggest they meet outside of their usual spots, but something about Emma made him want to see more of the city through her eyes. When she arrived, wearing a simple white blouse and a pair of light denim jeans, Ricardo couldn't help but notice how natural she looked, as if she belonged in the tranquil, picturesque streets of Savannah. Emma smiled as she approached, holding 2 iced coffees she'd picked up on the way. "Thought you might need one of these," she said, handing him a cup. "It's been a long day." Ricardo accepted the drink with a nod of thanks, taking a quick sip. "You're not wrong about that," he said, his lips curving into a faint smile. "But I could get used to ending the day like this." Emma glanced at him, her expression softening. "So, where to first?" Ricardo pushed off the truck, gesturing toward the park nearby. "Thought we could take a walk through Forsyth. It's quiet this time of day." The park was a haven of serenity, its famous fountain glistening in the late sunlight as children played nearby and joggers passed with earbuds in place. Ricardo and Emma strolled along the path, their conversation light at first. They spoke about favorite places in the city, childhood memories, and the quirks of Savannah's old neighborhoods. But as they reached a quieter section of the park, shaded by sprawling oaks, the conversation shifted. "Why Savannah?" Ricardo asked suddenly, glancing at Emma. "You said you moved here recently. What made you pick this place? Emma hesitated, her gaze fixed on the path ahead. I needed a change, she said finally, her voice steady but careful. I'd spent most of my life in big cities, New York, Chicago. Savannah felt different. It's slower, more personal. I guess I was looking for something simpler. Ricardo nodded thoughtfully, sensing the weight behind her words. And did you find it? Emma smiled faintly. I'm trying to. They walked in companionable silence for a while, the sounds of the park filling the spaces between their words. Ricardo eventually led them to a small food cart tucked near the park's edge, where he ordered a couple of sandwiches. They ate on a nearby bench, the simplicity of the meal adding to the ease of the moment. You've lived here your whole life, haven't you? Emma asked, breaking the comfortable silence. Pretty much, Ricardo replied. I've thought about leaving once or twice, but I don't know. There's something about this place. It's home. Emma studied him for a moment, her expression unreadable. I envy that, she admitted softly. Ricardo tilted his head, curious. Envy what? Knowing where you belong, Emma said. It's a rare thing. Ricardo considered her words, his gaze shifting to the canopy of Spanish moss swaying gently above them. I guess I've never thought of it that way, he said after a moment. I've always been here, so it just feels normal. But I can see how it might seem different if you're used to big cities. Emma nodded, her fingers lightly brushing the edge of the sandwich wrapper in her lap. Sometimes I think I've spent so much time chasing after what's next deal, next city, next goal, that I forgot to figure out where I actually fit. Ricardo's brow furrowed slightly as he looked at her. You seem pretty put together to me, he said, his voice sincere. But I get it. It's easy to lose track of what matters when you're always moving. Emma smiled at his observation, appreciating the honesty behind it. And you? Do you ever feel like you're stuck here? Ricardo chuckled lightly, leaning back on the bench. Sometimes. It's not perfect. Long hours, bills piling up, trying to save for the garage, but I don't know. It feels real, you know. Fixing cars, talking to neighbors, knowing the people who walk through your door. It's not glamorous, but it's mine. Emma watched him closely as he spoke, admiring the ease with which he seemed to embrace his life. She envied his ability to find fulfillment in simplicity, something that felt increasingly foreign to her. For so long, her identity had been tied to her successes, her wealth, her relentless drive. Yet, sitting here with Ricardo, she felt a pull toward something she couldn't quite name, something grounding, something true. Do you think you'll get it? The garage? She asked. I plan to, Ricardo said with quiet determination. It's slow going, but I've been saving every spare dollar. Roy's been helping me brainstorm ways to get it off the ground. We'll get there eventually. Emma nodded thoughtfully, the gears turning in her mind. It sounds like you've got a good plan. Ricardo glanced at her, the corners of his mouth curving upward. Yeah, but enough about me. What about you? What's your big dream? Emma hesitated, the question catching her off guard. She wasn't used to talking about herself in that way, especially with someone who didn't know the full extent of her life. Honestly? She said finally. I'm still figuring that out. Ricardo nodded, his gaze steady. Fair enough. Sometimes it takes time. Their conversation trailed off as they continued their walk, the golden light of the setting sun casting a warm glow over the park. It felt natural, effortless, as though they'd known each other far longer than just a few days. By the time they reached the parking lot, where Ricardo's truck was parked, the sky had shifted to hues of orange and pink. Emma turned to him, her expression softer now. Thanks for today, she said. I didn't realize how much I needed this. Any time, Ricardo replied, his voice warm. You know where to find me. Emma smiled, lingering for a moment before stepping into her car. As she drove away, she felt a strange sense of peace, a quiet assurance that she was exactly where she needed to be, at least for now. Ricardo watched her car disappear down the street, his thoughts lingering on her words. There was something about Emma, something he couldn't quite place, but he knew one thing for sure. He wanted to see her again. The following morning, Ricardo found himself back in the garage, the faint hum of the radio filling the background as he tinkered with a stubborn carburetor. His hands moved with precision, but his mind was elsewhere. He couldn't stop replaying the previous day in his head. Emma's laughter, the way her eyes softened when she talked about finding her place, and her admission about chasing goals without knowing where she belonged. She seemed so different from anyone he'd ever met, and yet there was something about her that felt familiar. "Earth to Ricardo," Roy's voice interrupted his thoughts. Ricardo looked up to see his co-worker leaning against the workbench, a mischievous grin on his face. "You've been zoning out all morning. What's got you so distracted? Let me guess, Miss Soup?" Ricardo rolled his eyes, though he couldn't hide the small smile tugging at his lips. "Her name's Emma," he corrected, focusing back on the carburetor. Roy crossed his arms, clearly enjoying himself. "Emma, huh? You've mentioned her a lot lately. So what's the deal? You two seeing each other?" "It's not like that," Ricardo said quickly, but even as the words left his mouth, he wasn't sure if they were true. "We're just talking. She's got a lot going on, and I don't think it's my business to pry." Roy raised an eyebrow. "A lot going on, huh? Sounds complicated. You sure you want to get involved with someone who might not be on the level?" Ricardo frowned, not liking the implication. "What's that supposed to mean?" "I'm just saying," Roy replied, raising his hands defensively. "Sometimes people aren't who they seem. You've got a good thing going here, man. Don't let someone mess with your head." Ricardo didn't respond, but Roy's words planted a seed of doubt. He had to admit there were things about Emma that didn't quite add up. The way she avoided certain questions, her vague explanations about her work, the air of mystery that seemed to follow her. Still, he didn't want to judge her unfairly. She'd been nothing but kind and genuine, at least as far as he could tell. By midday, Ricardo had managed to push his doubts aside, focusing instead on finishing the day's jobs. But as he wiped his hands clean and reached for his phone during a break, he noticed something odd. There was a new voicemail from an unknown number. Hitting play, Ricardo heard a clipped, businesslike voice. "Mr. Ricardo, this is Gordon Lake from Bennett Enterprises. I believe you've been spending time with our CEO, Ms. Emma Bennett. I suggest we discuss this matter at your earliest convenience." The message ended abruptly, leaving Ricardo stunned. "CEO? Ms. Emma Bennett?" Ricardo replayed the voicemail, disbelief tightening in his chest with every word. Emma was a CEO of Bennett Enterprises. The name sounded familiar. He'd seen it in the news or on one of those glossy business magazines at the grocery store. The idea that Emma, the woman who had laughed over sandwiches in the park and shared stories about trying to find where she belonged, could also be a high-powered executive, felt surreal. He leaned against the workbench, his mind racing. Why hadn't she told him? Was she hiding it because she didn't trust him, or was there something more to it? Ricardo wasn't sure what unsettled him more, the revelation itself or the fact that someone from her company, this Gordon Lake, had felt the need to call him about it. "What's up? You look like you've seen a ghost," Roy said, walking over with a wrench in hand. Ricardo hesitated. He wasn't ready to share what he'd just learned. "It's nothing," he said, forcing a shrug. "Just some weird call." Roy gave him a skeptical look but didn't press. "Well, whatever it is, don't let it mess with your head. We've got a customer coming in soon." Ricardo nodded absently, but his thoughts stayed with Emma. He needed to talk to her, to figure out why she hadn't been up front. Yet, a part of him wasn't sure if he wanted to know the answer. That evening, as the garage closed up and Ricardo headed home, he debated whether to call Emma. His phone sat on the passenger seat, her number highlighted on the screen, but his thumb hovered over the button, hesitating. Finally, he sighed and put the phone down. This wasn't a conversation to have over the phone. The next day, Ricardo decided to visit the diner, hoping he might run into her. He didn't want to accuse her or jump to conclusions, but he needed clarity. When he arrived, the familiar sound of the bell jingled as he stepped inside, but the booth by the window, the one she always seemed to gravitate toward, was empty. Marianne noticed him looking around and walked over, wiping her hands on her apron. "Looking for someone?" Ricardo hesitated. "Yeah, you could say that." Marianne gave him a knowing look. "Well, she hasn't been in today. You okay, hun? You seem off?" He managed a small smile. "I'm fine. Thanks, Marianne." As Ricardo sat down with a cup of coffee, his thoughts churned. What was he supposed to say when he finally saw her? Was he ready to hear the truth, no matter what it was? Meanwhile, across town, Emma sat in her office, her face pale as she stared at the email on her screen. Gordon's message was clear. He knew about her connection with Ricardo, and he wasn't above using it to question her judgment at the next board meeting. She clenched her fists, frustration and guilt bubbling inside her. She hadn't told Ricardo about her job because she wanted him to see her as she was, not the CEO, not the woman with the wealth and power that intimidated people. But now it was all unraveling, and she feared she might lose the one thing that had felt real in a long time. The hum of the garage was quieter than usual, the usual rhythm of the day disrupted by the thoughts racing through Ricardo's mind. The voicemail from Gordon still echoed in his ears, and the weight of its implications pressed heavily on him. He hadn't called Emma yet, hadn't been able to. Every time he thought about it, a mixture of frustration and confusion froze him in place. By mid-afternoon, Ricardo found himself pacing near the open garage doors, the late summer breeze doing little to calm him. Finally, he grabbed his phone, his thumb hovering over Emma's number once again. Before he could decide, the sharp sound of the shop's bell chiming cut through his hesitation. Turning, he saw her, Emma, standing just inside the doorway. She looked different today, her usual quiet confidence replaced with something heavier. Her eyes searched his, her posture uncertain, as if she knew this moment had been building. "Hey," she said softly, stepping closer. Ricardo crossed his arms, the tension visible in his stance. "Hey," he replied, his voice even but guarded. "Didn't expect to see you here." Emma hesitated, glancing around the garage. "I figured it was time I stopped avoiding things. We need to talk." Ricardo leaned against the workbench, his gaze fixed on her. "You're right about that." Emma nodded, bracing herself. "I know you got that voicemail," she said, her voice low. "Gordon told me he contacted you." Ricardo's jaw tightened. "Yeah, he did. Seemed pretty eager to make it clear who you are." Emma winced, the weight of the conversation settling between them. "I wanted to tell you myself," she said, her words earnest. "I just didn't know how." "You could have started with the truth," Ricardo said, his tone sharper than he intended. "Emma Bennett, Chief Executive Officer of Bennett Enterprises. That's kind of a big detail to leave out, don't you think?" Emma flinched, but she held his gaze. "You're right. I should have told you. But I didn't hide it because I wanted to deceive you. I wanted you to know me. Not the job, not the name, just me." Ricardo shook his head, his emotions boiling over. "Do you have any idea what that voicemail made me feel? Like I was some project, He trailed off, his voice faltering as the words he'd been holding back threatened to spill out. Emma stepped closer, her voice steady but trembling at the edges. "You're not a project, Ricardo. I never saw you that way. The only reason I didn't tell you was because I didn't want us, to get lost in everything else. I'm sorry I didn't handle it better, but I need you to believe me." Ricardo stared at her, his thoughts a storm of anger, hurt, and something else he couldn't quite name. He wanted to believe her, but doubt lingered, fueled by the sudden collision of their worlds. Emma stood in the silence, her words hanging in the air as she waited for Ricardo to respond. His expression was hard to read, his arms still crossed, his jaw tight, but his eyes gave away the turmoil inside. She took a slow breath, deciding to press on. "I didn't expect to meet someone like you," she said, her voice softer now. "You're different, Ricardo. You don't care about the things everyone else seems to, money, titles, status. You looked at me like I was just another person. Do you know how rare that is for me?" Ricardo let out a hollow laugh, shaking his head. "Yeah, well, it's a little hard to believe you didn't care about all that when you were keeping secrets." Emma flinched, but didn't back down. "I was scared," she admitted. "I've spent my entire life being defined by my last name, by what I own, by what people think I can give them. For once, I didn't want to be Emma Bennett, CEO. I just wanted to be Emma." Ricardo's posture softened slightly, though the tension in his shoulders didn't fully ease. He looked away for a moment, his eyes landing on the row of tools hanging neatly on the wall. "I get it," he said finally. "I do. But it still feels like you didn't trust me enough to be honest." Emma stepped closer, her voice pleading now. "It wasn't about not trusting you. It was about protecting something I wasn't ready to lose, and now—" Her voice caught and she paused, composing herself. "Now I'm standing here, hoping I haven't already lost it." Ricardo sighed, running a hand through his hair. He hated the knot of emotions twisting inside him, the anger, the confusion, and the undeniable pull he still felt toward her. "I don't know, Emma," he said finally, his voice quieter. "This is a lot to take in. I need some time to figure out what all this means." Emma nodded, her throat tightening. "I understand," she said, though her heart ached at his words. "But please, just don't shut me out. If you have questions, if you need to talk, I'm here." Ricardo didn't reply, but the look in his eyes told her he wasn't ready to walk away entirely. It was a fragile thread, but it was enough for now. As Emma turned to leave, she hesitated at the doorway, glancing back at him. "I meant everything I said. You're not a project to me, Ricardo. You never were." With that, she stepped out into the fading sunlight, leaving Ricardo alone in the quiet hum of the garage. He stood there for a long moment, staring at the space she had occupied, before finally letting out a long breath. His thoughts churned as he cleaned up for the day, the rhythmic motion of wiping down tools and locking cabinets, providing a faint sense of order amidst the chaos in his mind. He didn't know where they went from here, but one thing was clear. This wasn't over. Not yet. Ricardo sat alone at his kitchen table, the late evening light casting long shadows across the room. The remains of his dinner sat untouched in front of him, a plate of reheated leftovers he'd barely taken a bite from. His appetite was long gone, replaced by the weight of everything Emma had said earlier that day. Her words replayed in his mind, each one tugging at a mix of emotions he couldn't quite untangle. He wanted to believe her. There was sincerity in her voice, a vulnerability that didn't feel rehearsed. Yet the part of him that had been blindsided by her secret couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal. He hated that doubt lingered, casting a shadow over the connection they had built. It wasn't like him to let someone under his skin so easily. And now, he wasn't sure if it was a mistake. His phone buzzed on the table, jolting him from his thoughts. The screen lit up with a text from Roy. "You good? Let me know if you need anything." Ricardo smirked faintly. Leave it to Roy to check in without prying. He appreciated it, but this wasn't something he could explain over a text, or maybe even out loud. Shoving the plate aside, Ricardo leaned back in his chair and stared at the ceiling. The garage had always been his constant, the one thing in his life that made sense. People came in with problems, and he fixed them. Simple, predictable. But now, nothing about this situation felt fixable. It felt messy, complicated, and entirely out of his depth. Meanwhile, across town, Emma sat in her office, her hands trembling slightly as she gripped the edge of her desk. The board meeting had ended an hour ago, but the tension in the room still lingered like a bad aftertaste. Gordon had been his usual self, pointed, passive-aggressive, and relentless in his attempts to undermine her. "Your focus seems to be elsewhere lately," he had said, his tone oozing false concern. "I hope we can count on you to give this company your undivided attention." Emma had forced a polite smile, but the comment had landed like a punch. She knew what he was insinuating, that her personal life was a distraction, that she wasn't doing enough to maintain her position. It didn't matter that she had led the company to record-breaking profits last quarter, or that her strategic decisions had kept Bennett Enterprises ahead of its competitors. To Gordon, any sign of humanity was a weakness to exploit. Now, as she stared out the window, her reflection blending with the city lights, Emma felt the weight of the choices she had made. She had come to Savannah to escape this exact kind of pressure, to find a version of herself that wasn't defined by her job or her last name. And she had found it, in a way, with Ricardo. But now that world felt precariously close to slipping away. Her phone buzzed on the desk, pulling her attention. A message from Lila. "Call me when you can. You need to talk this out." Emma sighed, running a hand through her hair. Lila was right. She did need to talk. But what was there to say? She had told Ricardo the truth, and he hadn't walked away. Not yet, at least. But the doubt in his eyes had been unmistakable, and she wasn't sure how to fix it. Ricardo woke the next morning with a clearer head, but no fewer questions. As he pulled on his work boots and grabbed his keys, he resolved to focus on the day ahead. He couldn't sort through everything all at once, and work had always been his anchor. The steady rhythm of the garage might not have answers, but it offered him the chance to think. When he arrived, Roy was already there, tinkering with a customer's car. He looked up, wiping his hands on a rag, and gave Ricardo a long, assessing glance. "You look like hell," Roy said, not unkindly. Ricardo chuckled dryly. "Thanks. Just what I needed to hear." Roy shrugged. "Hey, honesty's part of the package, but seriously, you okay? You've been off the past couple of days." Ricardo hesitated, then sighed. "It's complicated." Roy leaned against the car, crossing his arms. "Complicated how? Like relationship drama complicated? Or something else?" "Relationship drama," Ricardo admitted, though the term felt too small for what he was dealing with. He didn't elaborate, and Roy, to his credit, didn't push. "Well," Roy said after a moment, "if you ever feel like hashing it out, you know where to find me. Otherwise, we've got a full docket today, so let's get to it." Ricardo nodded, grateful for the distraction. He buried himself in the work, the familiar sounds and motions helping to quiet his thoughts. But as the hours ticked by, Emma remained a constant presence in the back of his mind. Her words, her expression, the way she had stood in the garage, vulnerable yet resolute. It all lingered, refusing to let go. Across town, Emma sat in Lila's small but inviting kitchen, a steaming cup of tea in her hands. The aroma of chamomile filled the room, calming her frayed nerves as she recounted everything that had happened with Ricardo. Lila listened intently, her sharp green eyes focused and unwavering. "So he didn't walk away," Lila said when Emma finished, her tone contemplative. "But he didn't exactly stay either." Emma nodded, her fingers tightening around the mug. "He said he needed time, and I get that, but I don't know. What if I've already ruined this?" Lila leaned forward, her voice firm but gentle. "You haven't ruined anything, Em. You told him the truth, and that's more than most people in your position would have done. If he's worth it, and I think he is, he'll come around." Emma sighed, setting the mug down. "And if he doesn't?" "Then it wasn't meant to be," Lila said simply. "But you have to give him the chance to make that decision on his own." Emma nodded slowly, her mind still restless. She didn't want to lose Ricardo, not when he represented the first real connection she'd felt in years. But Lila was right. She couldn't force it. All she could do was wait and hope. As Ricardo locked up the garage that evening, he found himself reaching for his phone again. This time he didn't hesitate. He dialed Emma's number, and when she picked up, her voice was cautious but hopeful. "Hey," he said, his voice steady. "Can we talk? In person?" Emma's heart skipped a beat. "Of course. When?" Ricardo glanced at his watch. "Now, if you're free." "I'll meet you at the diner," Emma said without hesitation. As he hung up, Ricardo felt a knot of nervous anticipation in his chest. He didn't know how this conversation would go, but one thing was clear. He couldn't move forward without answers. The diner was quiet when Ricardo arrived, the familiar sound of the bell above the door signaling his entrance. The comforting aroma of coffee and freshly baked pie filled the air, but tonight Ricardo barely noticed. His eyes scanned the room until they landed on Emma, seated in their usual booth by the window. She looked up as he approached, her expression a mix of relief and apprehension. "Hey," Ricardo said, sliding into the seat across from her. "Hey," Emma replied softly, folding her hands in front of her. She studied his face, searching for some indication of how this conversation might go. "Thanks for meeting me." Ricardo nodded, leaning back slightly. "I figured we couldn't leave things the way they were." Emma exhaled, her shoulders relaxing just a fraction. "I'm glad you called." There was a brief pause, the weight of unspoken words filling the space between them. Ricardo broke the silence first. "I've been thinking a lot," he began, his voice measured. "About everything you said. About us." Emma's chest tightened at the word us, the vulnerability in his tone cutting through her usual composure. "I meant every word," she said quietly. "I didn't want to hide anything from you. I just didn't know how to tell you without changing this." "This," Ricardo repeated, gesturing between them. "Whatever this is." Emma nodded, her fingers nervously tracing the edge of the table. "I know it's not much yet, but it means something to me, more than I expected it to." Ricardo watched her for a moment, his eyes searching hers. "You've been honest with me now, and I appreciate that. But you have to understand, I don't live in your world, Emma. I don't know the first thing about it, and I'm not sure I ever will." Emma leaned forward, her voice steady despite the emotion behind it. "I'm not asking you to live in my world, Ricardo. I'm asking you to let me into yours." Ricardo blinked, her words catching him off guard. He hadn't expected her to frame it that way, and for a moment he didn't know how to respond. Emma continued, her tone softening. "Your world, it's real, it's grounded, it's everything I've been looking for, even if I didn't realize it at first. I don't want to change it, and I don't want to take anything away from it. I just want to be part of it." Ricardo let her words settle, the sincerity in her voice undeniable. "That's a lot to promise," he said finally. "My life's not exactly glamorous." "I'm not looking for glamorous," Emma said firmly. "I'm looking for something honest, and that's what I see in you." Ricardo leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table as he studied Emma's face. Her eyes held his, steadily, unwavering, and he felt the sincerity in her words. Still, the doubts that had plagued him for days lingered at the edges of his thoughts. "I hear what you're saying," he said after a long pause, "and I want to believe it. But the truth is, I'm not sure how this works. We're from two completely different worlds, Emma. What happens when those worlds collide?" Emma hesitated, acknowledging the weight of his question. "I don't have all the answers," she admitted, "and I know this isn't going to be easy, but I think it's worth figuring out, if you're willing." Ricardo exhaled deeply, leaning back in his seat. "It's not just about you and me, though. Your world comes with strings attached. People like Gordon, expectations, scrutiny. That's not what I signed up for." Emma's expression faltered briefly at the mention of Gordon, but she quickly recovered. "I know," she said softly, "and I won't pretend that those things aren't part of my life. But I'm not asking you to take all of it on. I just want us to try, to see where this can go. If it gets to be too much, we'll figure it out together." Her voice trembled slightly on the last word, and Ricardo could see the vulnerability she was trying so hard to mask. He realized that despite her wealth and power, she was just as uncertain as he was, just as scared of what might come next. It was a strange thing to witness, someone so seemingly in control laying their emotions bare, but it made her feel more real to him than ever before. "You really believe this can work?" he asked, his tone softer now. "I do," Emma said without hesitation. "But only if we're honest with each other from now on. No more hiding, no more secrets." Ricardo nodded slowly, his resolve starting to form. "All right," he said, his voice steady. "If we're doing this, we're doing it for real. No games, no pretending. I need to know you're all in." "I am," Emma said, a flicker of hope lighting her expression. "And I'll prove it to you." The tension between them began to ease, replaced by something lighter but no less significant. Ricardo allowed himself a small smile, the first genuine one he'd felt in days. "Okay," he said, "then let's see where this goes." Emma smiled back, relief flooding her features. For the first time since the confrontation in the garage, she felt like they were on solid ground again. Fragile, perhaps, but solid enough to start rebuilding. As they finished their coffee and talked about lighter topics, the lingering tension began to dissolve. By the time they left the diner, the night air felt cooler, calmer, as if reflecting the tentative peace they had reached. When Ricardo walked Emma to her car, he paused before she got in. "One more thing," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "If Gordon or anyone else tries to mess with me again, I need to know. No surprises." Emma nodded, her expression serious. "You'll know." "I promise." Ricardo stepped back as she got into her car, watching her drive away. His heart was still heavy with uncertainty, but for the first time in days, it felt like they had a chance. The next few days passed in a tentative rhythm, with Ricardo and Emma finding small ways to rebuild the connection they had almost lost. Their conversations were more open now, untainted by the secrecy that had caused so much strain before. Still, the lingering shadows of doubt and the complexities of their vastly different lives loomed, waiting for the right moment to resurface. At the garage, Ricardo found himself glancing at his phone more often than usual, half expecting a message or call from Emma. When it came late in the afternoon, he couldn't help the small smile that tugged at his lips. She wanted to meet that evening, this time at a quieter spot. a small park tucked away from the bustling streets of downtown Savannah. The location felt deliberate, a space where their worlds didn't feel so far apart. When he arrived, Emma was already there, sitting on a bench beneath a sprawling oak tree. She looked up as he approached, her smile warm but tinged with a nervous energy. In her lap was a small envelope, and Ricardo noticed the way her fingers fidgeted with its edges. "Hey," he said, sitting down beside her. "Hey," Emma replied, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. She gestured toward the envelope. "I brought something for you. Well, just open it." Ricardo took the envelope, his brow furrowing slightly as he slid it open. Inside was a check, an amount large enough to cover not only his dream of opening a garage, but also several years of operational costs. For a moment, he was stunned into silence, his mind racing to process what he was holding. "Emma," he said finally, his voice slow and deliberate. "What is this?" "It's a start," she said, her tone measured but firm. "I know how hard you've been working to save up for your own garage. This is my way of supporting you." Ricardo set the check down on the bench between them, his jaw tightening. "I don't know if I can accept this," he said, meeting her gaze. "It's too much." Emma's expression softened, though a flicker of frustration danced in her eyes. "It's not too much if it helps you get where you want to be. You've done so much on your own, and I'm not trying to take that away. I want to help." "But why?" Ricardo asked, his voice tinged with both confusion and suspicion. "Why do you feel like you need to do this?" Emma hesitated, the vulnerability she had shown at the diner returning. "Because I believe in you," she said simply. "Because I see the kind of person you are, and I know what you're capable of. You've spent your whole life helping other people, Ricardo. Let someone help you for once." Ricardo looked away, his thoughts a tangled mess of pride, gratitude, and unease. He wanted to believe her words, to trust in her intentions, but something about the gesture felt like a shift, a sign that their lives were colliding in ways he wasn't sure he was ready for. Before he could respond, Emma leaned forward, her voice quieter now. "You don't have to decide right now. Just think about it. That's all I'm asking." Ricardo nodded slowly, picking up the check but not looking at it again. "I'll think about it," he said, his voice reluctant but genuine. "But no promises." "That's all I need," Emma said, her smile faint but hopeful. The evening stretched on, and as they walked through the quiet paths of the park, the weight of the check seemed to hang between them, unspoken but palpable. Ricardo held it loosely in his hand, his mind circling back to the implications. It wasn't just money, it was a piece of Emma's world, and accepting it felt like crossing a threshold he wasn't sure he was ready for. "You're quiet," Emma said after a while, glancing sideways at him. The warm streetlights illuminated her face, softening the tension in her expression. Ricardo exhaled deeply. "It's a lot to process," he admitted. "I'm not used to things being handed to me. I've worked for everything I've got." Emma nodded, understanding the pride behind his words. "I know," she said gently. "That's part of what I admire about you. This isn't about changing that. It's about giving you a chance to focus on what matters instead of fighting uphill all the time." Ricardo stopped walking, turning to face her. "But what happens after this? If I take your help, what does that mean for us?" "For me?" Emma hesitated, meeting his gaze. "It doesn't mean you owe me anything," she said carefully. "It just means we're partners, equals. You've been honest about your world, and I want to be honest about mine. This is who I am, Ricardo. And if we're going to make this work, we can't ignore that." Her words settled heavily on Ricardo. He could hear the honesty in her voice, but the practical side of him couldn't help but wonder what accepting her help would truly cost. He'd always prided himself on standing on his own 2 feet, and this felt like stepping into unknown territory. As they continued walking, Emma's phone buzzed in her pocket. She sighed, pulling it out and glancing at the screen. Her face tightened, and Ricardo noticed the shift immediately. "Something wrong?" he asked. Emma hesitated before showing him the screen. It was a text from Gordon. "Your personal choices are becoming a distraction. The board is watching. We'll discuss this Monday." Ricardo frowned, his protective instincts flaring. "This guy again? What does he want now?" Emma slipped the phone back into her pocket, her expression darkening. "He's trying to scare me into falling in line. Gordon's been gunning for my position for years, and he sees this as an opportunity to undermine me." Ricardo's jaw tightened. "You don't deserve that." "I know," Emma said with a faint smile, though her frustration was clear. "But it's part of the game. I'll handle it." "You shouldn't have to," Ricardo said firmly. "If he keeps pushing, he's going to hurt more than just you." Emma looked at him, touched by the concern in his voice. "I'll be fine," she said softly. "But thank you for caring." Their conversation shifted after that, easing into lighter topics as they tried to recapture the peace of the evening. By the time they reached their cars, Ricardo had made up his mind about one thing. If Gordon was going to meddle in their lives, he wouldn't stand by and let Emma face it alone. That night, back at his apartment, Ricardo unfolded the check once more. The amount stared back at him, a stark reminder of the gap between their lives. But as he sat there, thinking about the day and the fight Emma faced in her world, a new resolve took root. He wasn't sure what their future held, but he knew one thing: he wasn't walking away. The next morning, Ricardo sent Emma a text. "Let's talk about the check." "I think I have an idea." Emma's reply came almost instantly. "I'm free tonight. Can't wait to hear it." The evening sky glowed with streaks of orange and pink as Ricardo pulled up to the small cafe where he and Emma had agreed to meet. It wasn't their usual diner or park, but a quiet spot Emma had suggested, tucked away from the busier streets. He stepped out of his truck, clutching a folder under his arm, a collection of his plans and sketches for the garage he'd been dreaming of for years. He hadn't looked at them in a while, but something about this moment made it feel like the right time. Inside, Emma was already seated near the window, nursing a cup of tea. She looked up as he entered, her smile cautious but warm. Ricardo nodded in greeting and slid into the seat across from her. "Hey," Emma said, her voice carrying a mixture of nerves and excitement. "You brought something?" Ricardo tapped the folder lightly. "I did. I've been thinking about what you said, about the check, about us, and I think I've figured out how to make this work." Emma leaned forward, her attention fully on him. "I'm listening." Ricardo opened the folder, spreading out a few hand-drawn sketches and notes. Some were rough diagrams of the garage layout he envisioned. Others were detailed lists of equipment and estimated costs. "I've been saving for years, doing side jobs, cutting corners where I can," he explained. "But even with all that, this is a big leap. Your offer, it could get this off the ground a lot faster, but I don't want it to feel like I'm taking a handout." Emma studied the papers, her expression thoughtful. "So, what are you thinking?" "A partnership," Ricardo said, his voice steady. "Not just in the garage, but in this whole thing between us. If I take your help, I want it to be an investment, not a gift, something we build together." Emma's eyes softened, a faint smile curving her lips. "Ricardo, you don't have to justify anything to me. But I like the way you think." "It's important to me," Ricardo said firmly. "I want to make this work, but I need to feel like I've earned it." Emma nodded, her respect for him deepening. "All right," she said. "Let's figure out the terms. What do you need from me?" They spent the next hour going over the details, with Emma offering insights from her business experience while Ricardo grounded their plans in practical reality. The conversation flowed easily, and for the first time in weeks, Ricardo felt like the weight of their differences was lifting. As the meeting wrapped up, Emma placed her hand over his. "I'm proud of you, you know," she said. "Not just for this, but for everything. You've made it this far on your own, and now you're letting me be part of it. That means more than I can say." Ricardo felt his chest tighten at her words, a rare vulnerability showing through. "I couldn't have done it without you," he admitted, "even if I didn't realize it at first." They left the cafe with a renewed sense of purpose, but as they stepped out into the cool evening air, Ricardo's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, frowning as he read the message. It was from an unknown number. "You think you can just waltz into her life? You don't belong here." His jaw tightened, and Emma noticed immediately. "What is it?" she asked, concern flashing across her face. Ricardo showed her the message, his expression dark. "I don't know who sent this, but I've got a pretty good guess." Emma's face hardened. "Gordon," she said flatly. Ricardo nodded, slipping the phone back into his pocket. "This guy doesn't quit, does he?" Emma sighed, frustration bubbling beneath the surface. "He's trying to scare you off. He thinks if you walk away, he can use it against me. But it's not going to work." Ricardo crossed his arms, his protective instincts kicking in. "I'm not going anywhere, but if he keeps this up, we're going to have a problem." Emma placed a hand on his arm, her touch grounding him. "Let me handle Gordon," she said firmly. "He's my mess, and I won't let him drag you into it." Ricardo hesitated, but the conviction in her voice reassured him. "All right," he said, "but if he tries anything else, I'm not staying quiet." Emma smiled faintly, her gratitude evident. "I wouldn't expect anything less." The cafe meeting had left both Ricardo and Emma feeling more aligned, but Gordon's interference lingered like a dark cloud over the progress they had made. Ricardo returned to his apartment that night with a simmering frustration. He wasn't used to being dragged into someone else's drama, but the idea of walking away from Emma didn't sit right with him. She had faced so much already, and for some reason he couldn't quite name, he wanted to be the one to stand beside her through it. Meanwhile, Emma sat in her office, staring at her computer screen. The glow of the city lights filtered through the large windows, casting long shadows across the room. She had spent the last hour drafting an email to the board, a preemptive strike to neutralize Gordon's attempts to sow doubt about her leadership. Every word had been carefully chosen, but she knew it wouldn't stop him entirely. Gordon was relentless, and his vendetta wasn't just professional, it was personal. The next morning, Emma's resolve was tested when she arrived at the office to find Gordon waiting by her assistant's desk. He greeted her with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, his posture stiff with barely concealed animosity. "Emma?" he said smoothly, falling into step beside her as she walked toward her office. "We need to talk." Emma didn't slow her pace. "If this is about my personal life, Gordon, I suggest you reconsider your priorities. There's a reason they're called personal." Gordon chuckled, a low, humorless sound. "Your personal life becomes the board's business when it affects the company. You should know that by now." Emma stopped abruptly, turning to face him. Her eyes were sharp, and her voice was steel. "The board cares about results, and my results speak for themselves. If you're hoping to convince them otherwise, I suggest you bring something more substantial than gossip." Gordon's smile faltered, but he recovered quickly. "I'm just trying to protect the company's image, Emma. That's my job." "And my job," Emma countered, "is to run this company. If you have a problem with how I do that, take it up with the board. Otherwise, stay out of my way. She stepped into her office and shut the door firmly behind her, leaving Gordon standing in the hallway. Her heart raced, but she refused to let him see any cracks in her armor. This was the game she had been playing for years, and she wasn't about to lose now. Later that evening, Ricardo arrived at the diner, his folder of plans in hand. Emma joined him a few minutes later, her expression a mixture of exhaustion and determination. She slid into the booth across from him, her hands wrapping around the coffee mug the waitress had placed in front of her. "Long day?" Ricardo asked, his voice low and steady. "You could say that," Emma replied, offering a faint smile. "But nothing I can't handle." Ricardo studied her for a moment, noting the tension in her shoulders and the slight weariness in her eyes. "You shouldn't have to keep fighting him on your own." Emma shook her head, her smile softening. "I'm used to it. And besides, you've got your own fight to focus on." "That doesn't mean I can't help," Ricardo said firmly. "We're in this together, remember?" Emma reached across the table, her fingers brushing against his. "I know, and it means more than I can say." Their conversation shifted to lighter topics as they went over the garage plans again, refining the details and discussing the next steps. For a while, the weight of their respective battles seemed to lift, replaced by a shared sense of purpose. But as the evening wore on, Ricardo's phone buzzed again. He glanced at the screen and frowned. Another message, this time more pointed. "Last warning. Walk away before you regret it." Emma saw his expression darken and reached for the phone. "Let me see." Ricardo hesitated, then handed it to her. She read the message, her jaw tightening. "It's Gordon," she said flatly. "He's trying to scare you." Ricardo's patience snapped. "Enough is enough. If he wants to talk, I'll give him something to talk about." Emma reached for his arm, stopping him. "Ricardo, no. That's exactly what he wants. He's trying to bait you into making a mistake." Ricardo clenched his fists, his frustration evident. "So what do we do? Just let him keep pulling this crap?" "No," Emma said firmly. "We don't. But we do it my way. Trust me on this." Ricardo met her gaze, the intensity in her eyes giving him pause. He exhaled slowly, nodding. "All right. Your way." Emma smiled faintly, though her determination was clear. "Good, because Gordon's about to learn what happens when he pushes too far." As they left the diner that night, the storm brewing around them felt closer than ever, but this time they were facing it together. The tension had reached a boiling point. Emma stood in the conference room of Bennett Enterprises, the long, polished table gleaming under the fluorescent lights. The board members were seated, their expressions a mix of curiosity and impatience. At the head of the table sat Gordon, his smug demeanor unmistakable as he shuffled through a stack of papers in front of him. Emma entered with purpose, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. She wore her confidence like armor, every detail of her appearance meticulously crafted to project strength. As she took her seat, Gordon glanced at her, his smirk widening ever so slightly. "Good of you to join us, Emma," he said, his tone dripping with false civility. "We've been reviewing some concerns raised about your recent decisions." Emma leaned back in her chair, her expression calm but unyielding. "I'm sure you have, Gordon. Why don't you enlighten us?" He gestured toward the documents in front of him, flipping through them with exaggerated care. "It's been brought to my attention that your personal relationships may be impacting your ability to lead effectively. The board deserves transparency on this matter." Emma met his gaze without flinching. "If by personal relationships you're referring to my involvement with Ricardo, then let me be clear. My personal life is just that, personal. And unless you have evidence that it has compromised my performance, I suggest we focus on the matters that actually concern this company." A murmur rippled through the board, but Gordon wasn't deterred. "Performance is precisely the issue," he said smoothly. "Your recent absence from critical events and your decision to associate with someone outside the corporate sphere have raised questions about your priorities." Emma leaned forward, her voice steady and sharp. "My priorities have always been this company and its success. The numbers speak for themselves. Under my leadership, Bennett Enterprises has not only met, but exceeded its targets every quarter. If you're implying that my personal choices have somehow undermined that, I'd love to see the evidence." Gordon faltered for a fraction of a second, but his composure quickly returned. "This isn't just about numbers, Emma. It's about perception. The board has a responsibility to ensure that the reputation of Bennett Enterprises remains untarnished." Emma's eyes narrowed. "The reputation of Bennett Enterprises is built on results, integrity, and leadership. If anyone here believes I've failed in any of those areas, I welcome them to say so now." The room fell silent, the tension thick in the air. Emma scanned the faces of the board members, challenging each of them to speak. None did. Gordon's smirk wavered, and Emma seized the moment. "If this discussion is an attempt to undermine my position, I suggest you reconsider, because I will not allow baseless accusations to distract from what truly matters: this company's continued success." The murmurs grew louder, but this time they carried a tone of agreement. One of the senior board members, a woman named Diane, spoke up. "Emma is right. The numbers don't lie, and neither does her track record. Unless there's concrete evidence to the contrary, I see no reason to question her leadership." Emma nodded her thanks to Diane, then turned back to Gordon. "If there's nothing further, I have work to do." Gordon's face was a mask of barely concealed frustration, but he didn't push further. Emma rose from her seat, her heart pounding as she walked out of the room. The confrontation wasn't over, but for now she had held her ground. As Emma exited the conference room, the adrenaline still coursing through her veins, her assistant handed her a note. "This just came in for you," she said softly, sensing the weight of the moment. Emma unfolded the paper, her brow furrowing as she read the brief message. "Garage papers finalized. Ready for your signature. Good luck tonight, Lila." A faint smile touched her lips as she folded the note and slipped it into her bag. The day wasn't over yet, but this was a reminder of the brighter horizon she was fighting toward. Tonight, she and Ricardo would finalize their plans for the garage, his garage. The thought filled her with a quiet determination that helped push aside the tension from the meeting. Meanwhile, Ricardo was in his element at the garage, despite the ever-present thoughts of Emma and the looming challenges they faced. He had spent the afternoon wrapping up a few final repairs and double-checking his plans for the evening. Every detail mattered now. This wasn't just about his dream anymore. It was about proving to himself, and perhaps even to Emma, that he could rise to the occasion. Roy appeared at his side, handing him a clipboard with a sly grin. "You've been walking around here like you're about to meet a governor or something. Big night." Ricardo chuckled, shaking his head. "Something like that." Roy crossed his arms, studying him. "You're serious about this, aren't you? About her?" "Yeah," Ricardo admitted, his voice steady. "I am." "Well then," Roy said, clapping him on the shoulder, "don't screw it up." Ricardo laughed, the moment easing some of the tension in his chest. "Thanks for the vote of confidence." By the time Ricardo and Emma met that evening, the day's events had taken their toll, but neither let it show. They chose a small, quiet space at the back of the cafe, spreading out the finalized plans for the garage between them. Ricardo had never been much for formalities, but tonight felt different, like a line was being drawn between the life he'd built and the one he was stepping into. Emma gestured to a stack of documents. Everything is ready for your signature, she said, her tone professional but warm. Once this is done, you'll have full ownership of the property and funding to get started. Ricardo hesitated, the weight of the moment pressing on him. This is really happening, he said quietly, almost to himself. Emma reached across the table, placing her hand over his. It is, and you've earned it, Ricardo, every bit of it. He met her gaze, the sincerity in her voice anchoring him. Slowly he picked up the pen and signed his name, the final step in a journey that had felt impossible not long ago. When he set the pen down, a wave of relief and pride washed over him. "Congratulations," Emma said, her smile radiant. "You're officially a business owner." Ricardo leaned back in his chair, a rare grin breaking across his face. "Feels good," he admitted, "like I'm finally where I'm supposed to be." They celebrated with coffee and pie, the moment feeling both monumental and strangely ordinary, a reflection of the balance they were beginning to find together. For the first time in weeks, the challenges that had seemed insurmountable felt manageable, even if only for the night. As they left the cafe, Ricardo walked Emma to her car. The cool night air carried the faint scent of jasmine, and the city lights cast a warm glow over the streets. "Thank you," Ricardo said suddenly, his voice earnest. "Not just for this, for everything, for believing in me." Emma smiled, her hand resting lightly on his arm. "You made it easy." For a moment, they stood there, the unspoken connection between them stronger than ever. Ricardo leaned down, his lips brushing hers in a kiss that was both tender and certain. When they pulled apart, Emma's eyes shone with emotion. "This is just the beginning," she said softly. Ricardo nodded, a rare confidence in his expression. "I know, and I'm ready." As they parted ways for the night, both felt a renewed sense of purpose. For Emma, it was about protecting the life she was building with Ricardo, no matter what challenges Gordon or the corporate world threw at her. For Ricardo, it was about stepping fully into the future he had worked so hard to create, with Emma by his side. The grand opening of Ricardo's garage was everything he had hoped for and more. The late morning sun bathed the small lot in golden light, reflecting off the bright, freshly painted sign that read, "Cooper's Garage, honest repairs, honest prices." Balloons swayed gently in the breeze, tied to the fence posts that framed the property, and a small table near the entrance offered coffee, pastries, and a stack of promotional flyers that Roy had insisted on designing. Neighbors and friends from the community milled about, mingling and exploring the new space. Some admired the gleaming equipment inside the open garage bay, while others chatted with Ricardo and Roy, offering congratulations and promises to spread the word. Ricardo stood by the entrance, shaking hands and accepting pats on the back, his smile equal parts pride and gratitude. Emma stood nearby, watching the scene unfold with quiet satisfaction. She wore a light flowing dress that swayed in the breeze, her smile soft but radiant as she caught Ricardo's eye. He excused himself from a conversation and walked over, his steps slow but deliberate. "You did it," Emma said, her voice filled with warmth. "We did it," Ricardo corrected, his gaze steady as it met hers. "I couldn't have gotten here without you." Emma shook her head slightly. "You've always had it in you, Ricardo. I just gave you a little nudge." Ricardo chuckled, glancing around at the bustling crowd. "This is bigger than I imagined. Feels like the whole neighborhood showed up." "That's because they believe in you," Emma said. "Just like I do." Before Ricardo could respond, Roy appeared, his grin wide as he waved toward the garage bay. "Ricardo, you've got to come see this. Marianne just showed up with half the diner crew and they brought a cake." Ricardo laughed, clapping Roy on the shoulder. "Lead the way." As Ricardo headed inside to greet the newcomers, Emma stayed back, taking a moment to reflect. She had come to Savannah searching for something she couldn't quite name, and somehow she had found it here, with Ricardo, with this community, with the simplicity and sincerity she had longed for. For the first time in years, she felt at home. Nearby, Lila appeared, her expression equal parts teasing and proud. "You're practically glowing," she said, nudging Emma playfully. "Careful, or people will start thinking you're the one opening the garage." Emma laughed, shaking her head. "I'm just happy for him. This is where he's meant to be." "And what about you?" Lila asked, her tone more serious now. "Is this where you're meant to be too?" Emma looked toward Ricardo, who was laughing with Marianne and Roy by the cake. Her chest tightened with emotion, but there was no hesitation in her answer. "Yes," she said firmly. "This is exactly where I'm meant to be." As the day wore on, the celebration only grew livelier. The garage bustled with laughter, conversations, and the occasional burst of applause as Ricardo greeted new visitors and thanked them for their support. For someone who had spent so much of his life working quietly behind the scenes, the spotlight felt both humbling and exhilarating. He caught Emma's gaze often, her steady presence grounding him amidst the excitement. When the crowd began to thin in the late afternoon, Ricardo stepped to the center of the garage bay, calling for everyone's attention. "Hey, everyone, can I have a minute?" he said, his voice rising above the chatter. The guests quieted, gathering closer as Ricardo stood beside Roy, who gave him an encouraging nod. Emma lingered near the back, her arms crossed loosely as she watched him take the floor. "I just wanted to say thank you," Ricardo began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "Thank you for showing up today, for believing in what I'm trying to build here. This isn't just a garage to me. It's a dream I've had for as long as I can remember, and seeing all of you here today makes me realize I'm not doing this alone. I've got my community, my friends, and—" He glanced toward Emma, his voice softening. "Someone who's shown me that even the biggest dreams are possible if you're willing to take a leap." The crowd broke into applause, and Emma felt her cheeks flush as Ricardo's words settled over her. He raised a glass of lemonade from the refreshment table, offering a toast. "Here's to honest work, good people, and all the roads ahead. Thank you." As the cheers echoed through the lot, Ricardo stepped down, weaving through the crowd until he reached Emma. She smiled at him, her eyes shining with pride. "You've got a way with words," she teased lightly. Ricardo shrugged, a sheepish grin spreading across his face. "I had good inspiration." They walked together toward the edge of the lot, the bustle of the celebration fading behind them. The sun was setting now, painting the sky in rich hues of orange and purple. Ricardo leaned against the fence, his expression thoughtful as he looked out at the quiet street beyond. "Feels surreal," he admitted. "All of it. The garage, the people, you." Emma stepped closer, her voice soft but firm. "It's not surreal, Ricardo. It's real, and you earned every bit of it." He turned to her, his gaze steady. "I don't think I could have done it without you, Emma. You saw something in me when I wasn't sure I could do this on my own." Emma smiled, resting a hand on his arm. "You were never alone, and you never will be." Ricardo reached for her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. They stood there in comfortable silence, the world around them quiet and still. In that moment, everything felt right, grounded, real, and full of possibility. As the last guests began to trickle out, Ricardo and Emma remained by the fence, watching as the night settled over Savannah. The faint hum of the city served as a reminder of where they had started and how far they had come. "This is just the beginning," Emma said softly, echoing her words from the night before. Ricardo nodded, his voice low but certain. "Yeah, and I'm ready for it." They shared a quiet laugh, leaning into each other as the stars began to appear overhead. For the first time in a long time, neither of them felt like they were searching. They had found what they needed, in each other, in themselves, and in the future they were building together. And as the lights of Cooper's garage glowed warmly in the background, a symbol of everything they had overcome, it was clear that this wasn't just an ending. It was a new beginning.